Hey guys, welcome back to the Ignaris TCG YouTube channel. Today I'm finally going to be doing a how to play video and teach you guys all the steps in order to play Ignaris TCG. So let's go. To start off, the objective of Ignaris is to defeat all 4 of your opponent's life cards before your opponent defeats yours. Your life cards are just 4 random cards that you set on your field at the beginning of the game. Your job is to use your entities, abilities, and symbiotes to defend your life cards from your opponent by summoning cards on the field, blocking your opponent from attacking your life cards directly, and attacking your opponent's life cards with your entities. Currently, in Ignaris, there are 4 different types of cards: entities, abilities, symbiotes, and spar. Entities will be your main hero cards or character cards that will engage in combat with your opponent. Entities are divided into 3 subtypes: beasts, warriors, and lords. To identify an entity subtype, the top right corner will have a symbol and the card will be a certain color. And if you look closely at the symbols, you might recognize a certain 3 characters. At the top, you'll see the name of the card. In the top left corner, you'll see a number that represents the spar cost in order to summon that entity. The symbols stacking underneath represent that entity's weakness, which we'll get into later. The center left represents the entity's death cost, which is the amount of spar you must nullify when that entity dies. We'll get into that later as well. The symbol in the center right corner represents the rarity of the card. White is common, blue is rare, yellow is golden rare, and green is ancient rare. The text box represents the card effect, and the darker italics text is just flavor text. The values at the bottom represent your entity's health points and attack points, HP and ATK. The value with the symbol next to it represents your entity's weakened HP, which again we'll get into later. Lastly, at the very bottom, there's some tiny text that mentions the illustrator and the rarity, set number, card number, and year. Abilities are your basic effect cards you can use to steer the game in your favor, like playing a card for free or wiping the entire board. These cards also have a spar cost in the top left corner in order to summon them. They can be summoned normally during your main phase, normal summon, or summoned during your opponent's turn, counter summon. Symbiotes are cards you can attach to entities to boost their attributes like increasing HP or attack. These cards have no spar cost and can be played anytime during your turn. But once you attach a symbiote to an entity, you can't remove it. Spar is the resource for the entire game. During the game, you'll stack up spar in your charge zone to summon entities and abilities. The amount of spar you have stacked represents your spar level. Sometimes spar can be nullified temporarily by an entity's death costs and other effects, preventing you from summoning cards. In a game of Ignaris, each player needs a 50-card deck. You are allowed up to 3 copies of the same card within the deck, not including spar cards. Before you begin, set aside 4 spar cards and stack them up in your charge zone. Next, each player shuffles their deck and places the top 4 cards of their deck face down at the back of their field. These will be the player's life cards. Then each player draws 6 cards. If you don't like your hand, you may shuffle it back into your deck and draw 6 new cards. You may mulligan like this up to 2 times. Next, players decide who goes first with a dice or a coin or by any other means. During a turn, players go through 5 phases: refresh phase, draw phase, main phase, strike phase, and end phase. During the refresh phase, players can disengage entities that have attacked the previous turn, if any are engaged in the first place. The first player of the game skips this turn since there aren't any entities to disengage. During the draw phase, players can draw 1 card from their deck. If a player has no cards left in hand, then on their next draw phase, they have to draw 5 new cards. Be careful though, because if you run out of cards to draw, you'll lose the game. During the main phase, players can charge spar, summon entities, summon abilities, attach symbiotes, use entity effects, and so on. During your main phase, you may charge as much spar as you have in your hand. The total number of spar you have charged represents your spar level. Your spar level determines which cards you can summon that turn. For example, if your spar level is 4, you may summon any cards in your hand with a spar cost of 1 to 4, with 4 being the max spar cost you can summon that turn. During the strike phase, players may attack and kill their opponent's entities and life cards. To kill an enemy card, your entity's attack value must be higher than the opponent's entity's HP value. If an entity is killed, it must be discarded in your graveyard, and you must also nullify the amount of spar shown in its death cost. To nullify spar, flip it over and place it beside your charged spar. It remains nullified until your end phase. If your spar is nullified, you are unable to use it to increase your spar level, leaving you less chances of summoning a higher leveled entity. To declare an attack, turn your entities upside down. Your entity is now engaged. When an entity is engaged, your opponent is unable to attack it on their next turn, but it will also be unable to defend your life cards. When your opponent's field is empty or all their entities are engaged, you may attack a life card. You may only attack one life card per turn. If you declare an attack on a life card, your opponent must flip it over. If the card is an ability, symbiote, or spar, they add it to their hand. If it's an entity, they have a chance to defend. If their HP is higher than your entity's attack, they have successfully defended. Your entity must be discarded to the graveyard, and their life card stays on the field. If their HP is lower than your attack, you've successfully killed a life card. Your opponent must then draw it to their hand. If an opponent has flipped one of your life cards that turn out to be an entity, you may use it as a last resort to attack, only if you have no other entities on your field. These life card entities don't engage when they attack. Each entity also has a weakened HP value next to their normal HP value. An entity's HP value can be weakened when your opponent has a certain number of entities on their field that your entity is weak to. For example, Crocolops the Beast is weak to warriors and has an HP of 560. If your opponent has 3 warriors in play, Crocolops' HP now becomes 390. You can use this to your advantage and play entities that weaken your opponent's entities and get to their life cards faster. Lastly, during the end phase, players recharge their nullified spar to signify the end of their turn, if they had any in the first place. During the game, players will go back and forth attacking and summoning cards. The first person to kill all opponents' life cards wins the match. If a player decks out, they'll lose the match. As a fun add-on, players may also choose to play a best 2 out of 3 match. If one player loses all their life cards, they take the next top 4 cards of their deck and place them as their second set of life cards, continuing until 2 sets of life cards have been defeated. One last thing to point out, sometimes during the match you may be required to nullify more spar during your turn before the end phase. For example, if you attack a life card and the entity turns out to be stronger than your attacking card, your entity will die and you will have to nullify the amount of spar written in the death cards. In these situations, only recharge the spar that was nullified on the previous turn, which would be your opponent's turn. Recharge the rest of the spar on your next end phase. And so yeah, those are all the steps in order to play a complete match of Ignaris TCG. Thanks so much for all the support. I hope you guys have fun playing Ignaris and building decks. Thank you guys so much. See you in the next one.